Welcome to Conversations with Writers. I'm Andy, I'm a writer, and this is an educational YouTube series meant to catalog writing strategies and philosophies through conversations with other writers. Julia Spicher Kasdorf often thinks about the relationships people have with the communities and places they come from, and also those places they choose to inhabit. Her writing is often concerned with social and environmental justice. Julia has published 5 collections of poetry. Most recently, she's published As Is from the Pit Poetry series, published in January 2023. In collaboration with photographer Stephen Rubin, Julia published Shell Play, Poems and Photographs from the Fracking Fields, which documents human and environmental impacts of natural gas extraction in Pennsylvania. The collection was published by Penn State Press in 2018. Julia is currently working with Rubin on a documentary project about agricultural activity within 30 miles of her home in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. Julia's previous collections in the Pit Poetry series include Poetry in America, published in 2011, Eve's Striptease, published in 1998, and Sleeping Preacher, published in 1992. And this is my conversation with Julia.
Okay, there we are.
So what are you working on now, and what motivated the project?
Boy, in the middle of the spring semester, a week and a half before spring break, it's hard to think that I'm working on anything. But I guess there are 2 things that are happening simultaneously. One is that about 3 weeks ago, a collection of poems was released by the University of Pittsburgh Press called As Is. And so I feel like part of my work right now should be to get that book of poems out into the world and try to get readings. And it all sort of came together very quickly. And so I didn't do a lot of that kind of advance work, but I am doing a few readings here and there, and I'm going to go to AWP and sit at a table and sign books. So that's one thing, and that's one really particular kind of work. But the other thing is a project that I've been working on for a long time, since before the pandemic started, that is a documentary project, and it's defined by the idea that I want to write documentary poems, and I'm working with a photographer, and he's taking photographs of agricultural activity within about 30 miles of my home in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. And the idea for this came because when he and I worked on Shell Play for 5 years, the documentary book about fracking, I realized how much I truly care about Pennsylvania and the earth. And also I realized how important the local is to me, and how I didn't realize growing up, I lived 30 miles from where I was born, which is really unusual for people who are ambitious and highly educated. I mean, it seems like if you get an education, that means you have to go away, especially if you come from Northern Appalachia, as I do. I mean, being successful means leaving, right? And somehow it happened that I was born in Lewistown. And even though I did most of my education in New York City, I ended up teaching at Penn State. And the world that I live in every day at work is very different from the world that my cousins inhabit 30 miles over the mountain, or other relatives. But still, I'm here. And one thing I realized is that's actually a privilege. It's not a shame or a burden. It's an incredible privilege. Because when people stay in one place for a really long time, they get to know things. And that's what I recognized in working on Shell Play. And it made me really curious about what would happen if I did a project that was so tightly focused. Another reason I'm doing it, because I've always wanted to write about agriculture here, because I have cousins who are on either end of the agricultural spectrum. So I have first cousins within 30 miles of my home who have the largest dairy farm in Mifflin County, over 1,000 animals, guys from Guatemala and Mexico milking the cows on the home farm where my father grew up. And I also have a cousin who works with her husband, mostly her husband does the work, and others, to raise organic produce for what she calls rich professors in State College in a community-sponsored agriculture farm. So there we are, right? Like that's us, that's our family. And what I've learned is that there's so many other kinds of agricultural activity that are happening around here. And I'm so interested in how the things people will do to keep their land, to stay in place. So many people have full-time jobs off the farm. At least the wife does. Sometimes two people do. So anyway, that's the project. I'm talking a lot, and why 30 miles? Because long ago, when they were mapping the counties, it was calculated that 30 miles was how far a healthy person could walk on foot or by horse in a day. So if you had to go to the courthouse and is this before cars, 30 miles was the extreme limit. And so I love that too. I mean, there was a part of me that one time that was thinking, oh, I wonder if I could walk. Like, could I walk to Lewistown? Could I try to walk to Lewistown in a day? I don't know that I'll do it. I mean, there's some mountains in between, but it just captured my imagination, that idea of the 30 miles. So that's one thing. That's a book I'm working on. And then another thing, well, this is sort of related. Last August, we did this folk opera, I'm not sure what to call it, about the invention of the collapsible Ferris wheel, which took place in Center Hall, which is just over the mountain from where we live in Belflint. And I interviewed the daughter of the man who invented the collapsible Ferris wheel, and she was a carny. And I talked to a bunch of carnies at the Grange Fair, and we made this musical. And we're hoping to perform it at the Grange Fair in August. We, being a composer, this guy, Bruce Trinkley, and I wrote the words, and there were photos, there's film. The daughter is in her early 90s. Her oral history is part of this whole thing. Anyway, in that world, there are these people called 40 milers. And 40 milers are carnies who want to sleep at their house at night. So they will only travel 40 miles from where their base is. And these people I was working on were 40 milers. So I feel like there's something magical about this, like, intentional locality that I seem to have stumbled onto. I have another project too, but I'll just stop.
No, please share the other project.
Because I realize I'm monologuing. Well, the other project, which is also related in the sense that it's ultra local, is something that my husband is a public historian, and he works for a firm outside of Philadelphia, but he works remotely, so he has a little office in Belfont, and has moved about 10 years ago when we got married. We love living in Belfont. We love the history of the place, and ever since I moved here, I heard that there was Underground Railroad activity here, and that there was a sizable Black community here in the 19th century. But we realized, and I'm thinking we started talking about this maybe during the pandemic when his job just shut down. And so he started doing other kinds of research. And I ended up developing a project, this huge grant proposal, which did not get funded. However, we're still working on it with the help of others, many others. But basically, the project is working with the census records between 1800 and 1950 to identify every Black person who was enumerated on the census, to try to understand how they came here and where they went. because that population is gone. And not just Bellefonte, but Center County. In 1860, 10% of Bellefonte was Black. And now the county, I don't know, it's less than 2 or 3. So I'm working with a grad student now who's writing a play about the life of one of these women that Phil has researched. And there will be music together with it, like period music from the 19th century. And we're working with Tony Leach, who's this esteemed conductor of choral music and researcher and the founder of the African American Music Festival at Penn State. So, and he's been doing this kind of work since the 90s. So pretty excited about that. That's happening in April.
All of these projects sound amazing, and I can't wait to check them out. What have you learned about yourself through writing?
You mean just lately or all my life?
Whichever you feel most comfortable answering.
I think I turned to writing as a child. I was one of those scribbling kids. About 4th grade, I started keeping a journal every day, and I took it everywhere, and it was really obsessive. And what I make up about that now is that I was just trying to have my version of the truth or the world, or it was a comfort to me to do that. And in some ways, I'm still doing that. You know, I write into trouble. I write into the things that trouble me. I write to try to understand things. I write to try to make beauty out of damage. And I think now that I'm a 60-year-old woman and I feel a certain amount of freedom to do what I want or to say what I want, at least a little bit more, it's not so important that I write it down, because it used to be like the only place I could say it was in writing. And I feel like now I feel freer to speak, but I think now I feel like, first of all, I see how everything is so connected. Everything is so connected in a way that I didn't necessarily see when I was younger. And so that writing becomes this way of holding it all. You know, all the things that keep us up at night and trying to wake people up.
What's the role or responsibility of writing for you? What keeps you generating material? Why write?
I'm not the first person who said this, but you write the book you want to read. I think that was really true about my first book, but it's also true now. You know, if you're not seeing your story, if you're not seeing your experience, it needs to be written. You know, it seems so simple to say that, but I'm still there, I guess.
I think that's completely true, especially in rural communities like where we come from, where so many of the people and so many of the situations and experiences sort of get either romanticized or forgotten altogether. And it really is our responsibility, if we want that truth to come out, it's got to be from us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you're struggling to write for whatever reason, what strategies do you use to get yourself back to the page?
Sometimes I call up a friend and talk. It's really good to have somebody listen. You know, like we all need that, just like we all need readers. But sometimes we just need somebody to listen and care, to remind ourselves that people value our words and our ways of seeing the world. I try to write every morning. And I think that helps. Like, even if it's like the morning pages idea. It's just thinking through the thoughts of what happened the day before, what are my intentions for the day. And I think that helps with just the sense of fluency. Like, I can put one word after another. And it might not be my project, but I'm always writing. I mean, every morning I'm writing. And for me, it's important to do it in the morning because it's this idea of like first things first. For me, it's very easy to attend to everybody else's needs and wants before mine. And so if I can get up before everybody and write before they wake up, and I think that habit, it just comes from when I had a child at home, which I no longer do, but it just like created this little space for myself. And it was like a space of care for writing. So I think that practice helps, that when I have something I want to work on or something I need to work on, I can also try out ideas in those morning pages so that I'm not sitting down cold to something at the beginning.
What revision strategy or strategies do you find most useful when revising your own work, and why? What sort of problems or challenges do these activities help you solve?
I have a hard time talking about revision. I have a hard time teaching it. I think I have a premium on clarity. And I know that not every poet does, and not every poet should. But for me, it's always like, is this clear? Then another thing is like, is this true? And I don't mean like, did it happen? I mean like, although I do sometimes mean, did it happen? Because often the thing that I think is the truth of the event might be obscured by my bias. And if I think really hard about what really happened, sometimes it forces me to tell a deeper truth, because if you're so used to using writing to like set your own story straight, what's built into that is your own bias. So revision can be a place to examine the lenses that you're looking through. And I suppose, and part of this is like, and then doing documentary work, I do a lot of fact checking. I do as much fact checking as I can. So, but even when I'm not doing documentary work, even when I'm writing a lyric poem, emotional truth is important to me. And if there are details in the real world, if they can be factual, then I'm interested in that too. Concision, I move things around. I say things out loud all the time. And I replace words in that way because of the sound.
What is your favorite part of the writing process, and why?
I love the beginning, and then I feel like I get stuck, and then I don't love it anymore. But then I love that place you can reach after you've worked on revision enough that you begin to start seeing things that you didn't realize were there. And so there's like this discovery. And for me, it often comes pretty late, because I sit down with an intention. And if I can get past what I think the poem is about or the essay is about, and start touching other things and then beginning to see connections, that's when it's like magic. That's what I really love the most.
What reading suggestions do you have? What writers do you keep in your back pocket?
I return to, well, just, you know what? This is really weird. This is not someone I keep. Someone I keep in my back pocket is Yehuda Amichai, the Israeli poet. Someone I returned to because I was working on an essay and I was thinking about him, who I hadn't read in a very long time, was Galway Kinnell. And it was really lovely to read his work again and to hear his voice and to feel there's a kind of, even in his early work, there's this kind of lightness in the voice. Like it does not feel labored, even though it's incredibly musical. Also, I love the kinds of things he writes about. So those are two people. I feel like I should have made a list because now I'm completely drawing a blank. I'm interested lately in what Erica Meitner has been doing. And the reason is, you can tell because of the kind of documentary bent that we both have in different ways.
Thank you for that list, and thank you for making time to hang out with me. I've learned so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your interest.